It's about what?
I'm sad for those who don't feel that they are loved in order to work in this.
He was the calm in the chaos, the quiet voice that made millions of children feel safe. But what if the man behind the red cardigan wasn't as unshakable as he seemed? Behind every soft smile and thoughtful word was a deeply human story, one filled with struggle, doubt, love, and quiet courage. This isn't just the story of Mr. Rogers you saw on television. It's the story you didn't. The one that reveals why his message still matters and how his quiet strength changed the world. Ready to discover the truth behind kindness?
I think that the most important thing that we do is being honest.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this?
Over 25 years.
25 years?
For decades, Fred Rogers was a familiar presence in homes across America and beyond. With his soft voice, calm manner, and signature cardigan, he became a trusted figure for generations of children. Each episode of his long-running television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, began the same way. He would walk through the door, take off his jacket, change into his cardigan, and swap his dress shoes for sneakers. Then he'd look directly into the camera and say, "Won't you be my neighbor?" It was a simple greeting, but one that left a lasting impression. Fred Rogers wasn't interested in flashy production or high-energy performances. His show was deliberately quiet and slow-paced, especially compared to the fast and colorful children's programming that dominated TV schedules. There were no explosions, no rapid-fire jokes, no exaggerated characters. Instead, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood offered something different, a place of calm, stability, and emotional safety. For many children, it became a rare environment where they felt genuinely seen and valued. Fred Rogers, however, was more than just a television personality. He was a trained musician, a writer, a producer, and an ordained Presbyterian minister. But even with all those credentials, the heart of his work remained the same, helping children understand the world around them and their place in it. He didn't pretend life was always easy. Instead, he used his show to talk directly and honestly about feelings, especially the difficult ones like fear, sadness, frustration, and loneliness. What many viewers didn't realize was how much intention and discipline went into maintaining the tone of the show and the image of Fred Rogers himself. His gentle demeanor wasn't an act, but it also wasn't effortless. Friends, colleagues, and family members have described how much thought and care went into every moment of the show. Each line was carefully written. Each segment was planned to communicate something meaningful. Behind the scenes, Fred worked tirelessly to ensure that the show stayed true to its mission, to honor children and to help them feel understood. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood first aired nationally in 1968, a period marked by social upheaval and rapid cultural change. At the time, children's television was mostly focused on entertainment, bright colors, fast movements, catchy jingles. But Fred believed that children needed something deeper. He saw television as a powerful medium for good, one that could teach empathy, kindness, and emotional intelligence. Rather than trying to grab children's attention with noise and spectacle, he slowed things down. He spoke softly, directly to the camera, and used long pauses to give kids space to think and reflect. He didn't shy away from serious subjects either. Over the years, the show addressed complex issues including divorce, death, racial equality, and disability, topics that were rarely discussed on children's programs at the time. What set Fred apart was his belief that children are capable of understanding deep, emotional truths, as long as they are explained with honesty and care. He often said that feelings are mentionable and manageable, a phrase that summed up his approach. If children could learn to talk about their feelings, especially the ones that scared or confused them, they would be better equipped to navigate the challenges of growing up. Despite the calm and steady presence he maintained on screen, Fred Rogers faced many of the same challenges and insecurities as anyone else. Those who knew him well have spoken about the pressure he felt to live up to the image the public had of him. He knew that many people saw him as a kind of moral compass, a flawless role model, but in reality, he was human. He had moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. Still, what made his work so meaningful was precisely the fact that it came from a place of intention, not perfection. His daily routines reflected that commitment. He was known to stick to a strict schedule, waking up early to swim laps and beginning each day with spiritual reflection. He paid attention to small details, believing that every part of the show, from the set design to the tone of his voice, had an impact on the children watching. Fred Rogers didn't take shortcuts. He treated his young viewers with respect and never talked down to them. Many people assumed that he was naturally calm and collected, but according to his wife, Joanne Rogers, the calmness people saw on TV was something he worked hard to maintain. It didn't always come easily. In private, he could get frustrated or discouraged like anyone else. What made him different was the way he handled those moments. He channeled them into his work, using his own experiences to help others feel less alone. Fred believed that everyone deserves to feel that they matter, and he knew that children in particular often struggled with feelings of confusion or isolation. Mr. Rogers' neighborhood became a space where those feelings were not only acknowledged, but treated with compassion and care. Children didn't have to pretend to be happy all the time. They could be scared or angry or sad and still be loved. The show's slow pace was often criticized by adults, especially in its early years. Some argued that it was too boring, too soft-spoken, too outdated, but Fred never wavered. He believed in the value of quiet moments and thoughtful conversation, and over time, the show's impact spoke for itself. Millions of children grew up with Mr. Rogers as a steady presence, someone who made them feel safe, understood, and accepted. Even today, long after his final episode aired, Fred Rogers is remembered not just for what he said, but for how he said it. His approach to communication, gentle, clear, and deeply respectful, continues to influence educators, psychologists, and media producers alike. His legacy lives on in the idea that being kind, calm, and emotionally honest is not just good for children, it's good for all of us. What makes Fred Rogers' story so compelling is that his kindness wasn't a performance, it wasn't a brand, it was a choice he made every single day, despite the pressures and doubts he faced behind the scenes. The world often forgets that choosing to be gentle, especially in a world that rewards loudness and speed, takes strength. But Fred Rogers proved that it's possible to be soft and strong at the same time, and in doing so, he changed the lives of millions. Long before Fred Rogers became a television icon, he was just a young man trying to figure out his path in life. Born in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, Fred had a quiet and reflective personality. He wasn't outgoing or attention-seeking, but he was deeply thoughtful, with a strong interest in music. It was music, in fact, that shaped much of his early life and eventually led him to Rollins College in Florida. It was there during his time as a student that he met someone who would become an essential part of his personal and professional life, Joanne Bird. Joanne wasn't looking to meet someone famous. She didn't care about television or public attention. What stood out to her about Fred was his ability to really listen. In a world full of people waiting for their turn to talk, Fred was someone who paid attention, who gave space for others to share without judgment. They were both studying music. Fred focused on composition and piano, while Joanne pursued performance and voice. They spent many hours in the practice rooms, but it was the conversations between the music sessions that helped them build a lasting bond. Their connection grew naturally. It didn't involve grand romantic gestures or dramatic moments. Instead, it developed through quiet conversations, shared values, and the mutual respect they had for one another's strengths and vulnerabilities. Fred and Joanne learned early on that they could rely on each other, not just as partners, but as partners, friends. When Fred moved to New York to begin working in television, and Joanne stayed behind in Florida, their relationship didn't weaken. This was long before mobile phones and social media. They had no way of staying in constant touch other than through traditional letters. But that was enough. Fred poured his thoughts into his letters to Joanne, often writing at length about what he was thinking and feeling. In those letters, a different side of him emerged, one that was funny, tender, and sometimes uncertain. They weren't just updates, They were deeply personal reflections. Over time, those handwritten notes became more than just a way to stay connected. They helped deepen their relationship. In one of those letters, Fred proposed. His question was simple, but it carried years of emotion and hope. "Will you marry me?" Joanne said yes immediately. According to her, she was so excited that she almost misplaced the letter on her way to make a phone call. That moment marked the beginning of a lifelong partnership, not just in marriage but in purpose. Their marriage, like most, wasn't perfect. They had their share of disagreements and moments of frustration. They raised 2 sons together, and parenting, especially in the public eye, wasn't always easy. But what kept them together wasn't perfection. It was shared values, music, honesty, mutual respect, and a shared belief in kindness as a daily practice. While the world saw Fred Rogers as a calm, gentle figure who always knew the right thing to say, Joanne saw a fuller version of him. She knew the man behind the camera, the one who sometimes felt insecure, who worried he wasn't doing enough, who struggled with the weight of being seen as a moral authority. She often described him as someone who wasn't perfect and never claimed to be. In her words, Fred wasn't a saint. His kindness wasn't magical. It was the result of constant work and intentional choices. Joanne's presence in Fred's life helped him stay grounded. Her humor, honesty, and strength balanced his more introspective nature. When the pressures of his public image became overwhelming, it was Joanne who reminded him of who he really was. She encouraged him, challenged him, and provided emotional support when he needed it most. She wasn't just Fred's wife, she was his closest ally. Throughout their marriage, they returned to music often. It remained a shared language for both of them, especially in quiet moments away from the spotlight. Their home was filled with the sound of piano keys and spontaneous harmonies. For Fred, music was more than a passion. It was a way to process the world. And with Joanne, he had someone who understood that instinct deeply. While Fred became the face of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, Joanne stayed mostly behind the scenes. She didn't seek attention or recognition, but her role in Fred's life and work was significant. She offered feedback on his ideas, helped him stay emotionally balanced, and gave him space to be himself without the expectations that came with being Mr. Rogers. It's clear from many accounts that without Joanne's quiet support, Fred's public work would have been much harder to sustain. As the years passed and Fred's influence grew, their relationship remained steady. They navigated the challenges of fame, parenthood, and aging together. Their marriage wasn't built on pretending everything was fine. It was built on honesty, patience, and a shared understanding that kindness takes effort. And that effort was something they were both committed to. When Fred spoke publicly about love and emotional safety, he wasn't just reading from a script, he was speaking from experience. His home life, particularly his partnership with Joanne, gave him a real-world foundation for the values he shared on screen. She helped him stay connected to what mattered, and in return, he made sure that their relationship was a priority, even when his career demanded a lot of his time and energy. It's important to remember that Fred Rogers wasn't a perfect man, trying to teach others how to be perfect. He was a flawed, complex individual, doing his best to live by the values he believed in. And Joanne knew that. She loved him, not because he was a public figure, but because he was real. Someone who tried every day to be a little better, even when it was hard. Later in life, Joanne became more vocal about Fred's struggles. After his death, she spoke about how difficult it was for him to carry the weight of his public image. She wanted people to understand that his kindness was real, but it wasn't always easy. By sharing these details, she didn't aim to diminish Fred's legacy. In fact, she strengthened it. She reminded the world that being kind isn't about being flawless. It's about choosing to be gentle, even when you're tired, patient, even when you're frustrated, and open-hearted, even when you feel vulnerable. Fred and Joanne's story is not just a love story. It's a story of mutual respect, quiet resilience, and the shared belief that small, consistent acts of kindness can make a big difference. Their relationship gave Fred the emotional strength to show up day after day for millions of children. And Joanne's quiet role in that process deserves recognition, not because she needed it, but because it shows that behind every strong public figure, there is often someone working just as hard in the background. Together, Fred and Joanne built a life that embodied the very message Fred brought to television screens. A message that said, it's okay to feel, it's okay to struggle, and most importantly, it's okay to be human. That humanity, not perfection, is what truly connects us. And as Fred's journey continued, Joanne's support would become even more important, especially as they faced the most difficult chapter of their lives together. When Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood first premiered in 1968, it looked and felt different from anything else on television. At a time when children's programming was mostly loud, fast-paced, and filled with slapstick comedy or animated chaos, Fred Rogers introduced something else entirely. His set was simple, his tone was calm, and his message was centered around emotional understanding rather than flashy entertainment. To many, the show seemed almost too slow, too quiet, even out of step with the direction television was heading. But for Fred, that quietness was the point. He wasn't trying to compete with cartoons or grab children's attention with bright colors and silly voices. Instead, he believed children deserved more than just entertainment. He believed they needed to be heard, understood, and treated with the same respect given to adults. He spoke directly into the camera, addressing the viewers not as a group, but as individuals. It created a sense of connection that children across generations would remember for years. What set Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood apart was not just the way it looked or sounded, but what it dared to talk about. Fred Rogers wasn't afraid of difficult topics. While most shows aimed at children focused on academic learning, numbers, letters, shapes, Fred focused on the emotional world. He tackled issues that many adults found uncomfortable to discuss with kids: fear, sadness, anger, loneliness, even death. He believed that children needed a safe space to explore their feelings, especially in a world that often dismissed or ignored them. Fred used everything in the show, from his tone of voice to the puppets in the neighborhood of make-believe, to address real-life situations children were going through. Characters like Daniel Tiger, King Friday, and Lady Aberlin weren't just whimsical inventions. They were tools Fred used to help children understand what they were feeling. For example, Daniel Tiger often expressed fear or insecurity, giving young viewers a character they could relate to. In this way, the program created a space where children felt seen and validated. Over time, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood became more than just a television show. It became a trusted presence in many households, a routine that helped children feel calm and understood. Parents appreciated the gentleness of the program, and teachers and psychologists praised its psychological depth. Fred's message, that feelings are normal and that every person has value, resonated in a culture that didn't always give those messages to children. But behind the scenes, the work wasn't as effortless as it appeared. Fred Rogers carefully planned every element of the show. Each script was crafted with intention. Every line, every pause, every gesture had a purpose. He paid close attention to language, making sure the words he used were both clear and respectful. If a script said, "You'll never go down the drain," he made sure to explain it in a way that a child could understand and believe. That kind of detail wasn't accidental. It was part of a broader philosophy that took children's emotional well-being seriously. Fred also worked closely with child development experts to ensure the show aligned with what children needed at different ages. His approach was deeply rooted in research, but it never felt clinical. Instead, it felt personal. That was largely because Fred believed that children deserved to be treated as people, with real thoughts and real emotions, not simply as small versions of adults. The emotional labor involved in maintaining that kind of consistency was immense. Fred wasn't just a presenter, he was a writer, a composer, a puppeteer, and a producer. He was involved in nearly every part of the production. But more than that, he bore the emotional responsibility of being a calm, stable figure for millions of children. That kind of responsibility didn't come without cost. At home, Fred sometimes struggled with the pressure of being Mr. Rogers. His wife, Joanne, later revealed that, while Fred was naturally kind and gentle, he also had moments of frustration and doubt. He was a human being, not a fictional character, and the weight of always being seen as a symbol of goodness took its toll. Raising their two sons wasn't without challenges either. On screen, Fred was a model of patience, but in private, parenting required a different set of skills, and it wasn't always easy for him to switch between those roles. Fred also relied on structure and routine to manage the emotional weight he carried. Each day he swam, wrote letters, and weighed himself, aiming to maintain his weight at exactly 143 pounds. That number wasn't arbitrary. To Fred, it represented the phrase, "I love you." 1 letter in I, 4 in love, and 3 in you. These rituals weren't about vanity. They were small, consistent ways for Fred to stay grounded and remind himself of the values he wanted to live by. Despite the public perception that he was endlessly calm, Fred experienced anxiety. Friends and family later shared that he had internal worries about whether he was making a real impact, about whether he was being honest enough or doing enough. He didn't want to be seen as flawless. In fact, he often avoided praise. He was uncomfortable with fame and resisted being placed on a pedestal. Fred's resistance to celebrity culture wasn't an act. He genuinely believed that success wasn't about attention or awards. He measured success by how his work helped people feel. Did they feel valued? Did they feel understood? Did they feel loved? Those were the questions that mattered most to him. Even as he gained recognition, including awards and honorary degrees, he maintained a simple, quiet life. He avoided red carpets and interviews unless they served a clear purpose. More often, he could be found playing the piano, going for walks, or spending quiet time with Joanne. The emotional intensity of his work became even more apparent later in his career. As societal issues became more complex, Fred continued to address them on the show. From racism and war to disability and divorce, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood gently explored subjects that even many adults found difficult. He believed in speaking the truth to children, but always in a way that was developmentally appropriate and grounded in love. And still, Fred often questioned whether he was doing enough. He carried a quiet fear of not living up to the image people had of him. But rather than letting that fear paralyze him, he used it as motivation. He poured those feelings into his work, turning his own struggles into lessons that helped others feel less alone. That's what made his message so powerful. It wasn't based on perfection, it was based on shared humanity. Fred's impact wasn't confined to a single generation. The children who watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood grew up remembering how the show made them feel. Many have spoken about how it helped them navigate difficult childhoods, manage emotions, and understand complex issues. Others have passed his message on to their own children through new shows inspired by Fred's original work. While the show officially ended in 2001, its influence continues. The values Fred championed, kindness, empathy, emotional honesty, remain relevant today. His presence may no longer appear on new episodes, but his ideas live on through successes, like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and through the ongoing efforts of organizations that carry his message forward. Even decades after it first aired, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood remains a landmark in children's programming. It didn't rely on trends or gimmicks. It succeeded because it spoke to something universal: the human need to be loved, understood, and accepted just as we are. And at the heart of it all was Fred Rogers, a man who, despite his own doubts and difficulties, chose every day to show up with love and patience. Fred Rogers spent decades helping children feel safe, valued, and understood. Through Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he provided comfort during difficult moments. offered gentle lessons on emotional awareness, and helped countless viewers feel seen. But while millions looked to him for reassurance, Fred was not immune to fear, uncertainty, or personal hardship. His greatest challenge came not in front of the camera, but during the final years of his life, away from the public eye, surrounded by only those closest to him. It began with discomfort, stomach pain that Fred initially downplayed. Like many people, he was used to pushing through mild health issues, but the pain didn't go away. It grew stronger, more persistent. After a series of medical appointments, Fred received a diagnosis that changed everything: stomach cancer. By the time it was caught, the disease had already progressed. For someone who had always placed others' needs above his own, who had spent his life helping others through pain and fear, facing a serious illness brought with it a new kind of vulnerability. His wife, Joanne, later described how difficult those months were. Fred, who had always been a symbol of strength and stability for others, was suddenly navigating an unfamiliar world of doctor visits, medical treatments, and physical decline. The daily routines that once grounded him, morning swims, consistent meals, the small habits that had shaped his life, became harder to maintain. Even simple tasks became a struggle. The man who had kept his weight at exactly 143 pounds as a daily reminder of love could no longer do so. His body, once dependable and disciplined, was now frail and unpredictable. Still, even in illness, Fred remained committed to his values. He continued to write letters, to reflect on his faith, and to offer comfort to those around him. In his final public appearance, he served as the Grand Marshal of the Rose Parade. Though visibly weakened, he chose to show up. One last act of quiet courage, honoring the commitment he had made to his audience years before. At home, Fred leaned on music for comfort. The piano, a lifelong companion, gave him a voice when words were too difficult to find. In those final weeks, he returned again and again to the keys, playing familiar melodies that brought peace and reflection. Music had always been a way for Fred to express himself. It allowed him to share emotions that didn't always come easily in conversation. Even in his final days, it remained a part of who he was. Fred Rogers passed away on February 27, 2003, in his home in Pittsburgh. He was surrounded by his family. His death came just one day after his grandson's birthday, a moment that underscored the bittersweet nature of life, where joy and sorrow often arrive side by side. The news of his passing made headlines, and tributes poured in from all over the world. People shared stories of how his show had shaped their childhoods, helped them through difficult times, or simply made them feel like they mattered. For a time, Joanne remained quiet about the final months of Fred's life. She wanted to protect his legacy, to preserve the image people held of him as a source of kindness and strength. But over time, she chose to share more, not to diminish his legacy, but to deepen it. She explained that Fred's strength didn't come from being perfect. It came from choosing to love, even when it was hard. His compassion wasn't automatic. It took effort. It was a choice made every day. After Fred's death, many assumed his work would gradually fade from public memory. His voice was gone, the show had ended. But that assumption overlooked one very important person, Joanne Rogers. She had been Fred's partner for over 50 years, a steady presence behind the scenes, and after his passing, she quietly stepped forward to continue his work. As chair emerita of Fred Rogers Productions, she played a vital role in preserving and extending his legacy. Joanne didn't try to become Fred. She didn't attempt to mimic his style or take his place on screen. Instead, she used her own strengths, humor, resilience, and honesty to speak about the values they had shared. She appeared at events, supported educational initiatives, and helped ensure that Mr. Rogers' neighborhood would remain available to future generations. She also supported new projects like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which adapted Fred's original ideas into a modern, animated format. Through these efforts, Fred's lessons continued to reach children in a way that honored the original mission. In 2019, Joanne made a small but meaningful appearance in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, a film inspired by Fred's life. Her cameo reminded audiences that the legacy of Mr. Rogers was still very much alive, not just in reruns or documentaries, but in living people who had been shaped by his presence. Joanne's dedication made it clear that the work they had done together wasn't frozen in time. It was still evolving. Fred Rogers' influence extended far beyond television. His face now appears on murals, school walls, and public parks. Quotes like, "You are special, and I like you just the way you are," have become more than catchphrases. They are reminders of a philosophy centered around unconditional acceptance and emotional honesty. The message he spent his life sharing, one of kindness, empathy, and the value of every person, has found a lasting place in education, parenting, and mental health conversations. In 2019, Pennsylvania honored Fred in a unique way by declaring May 23rd, the 143rd day of the year, as 143 Day. The number had long been associated with Fred's way of expressing love. 1 for I, 4 for love, and 3 for you. On this day, people are encouraged to perform acts of kindness, to be good neighbors, and to reflect on how they can make the world a little gentler. It's a celebration not of fame or achievement, but of small choices made with care, something Fred believed in deeply. Fred's routines, his private doubts, his intentional kindness, all of it paints a picture not of a flawless icon, but of a deeply human individual. Friends and family have openly spoken about his struggles with anxiety and self-doubt. Joanne recalled how even in the final weeks of his life, Fred questioned whether he had done enough. At one point, he asked her a quiet question from his hospital bed. "Am I a sheep?" It was a reference to his Christian faith, a way of asking whether he had lived up to the values he had taught for so many years. That moment captured his humility, his constant desire to remain authentic, and his awareness that being kind is not a destination, but a daily journey. Fred Rogers never wanted to be worshipped. He didn't care about celebrity or status. What mattered to him was whether people felt seen, whether children believed they had worth, and whether love could be made real through small actions. He never pretended to have all the answers. Instead, he reminded people that being human, with all the fears, flaws, and uncertainties that come with it, was enough. His life wasn't perfect, but it was meaningful, and in its quiet way, it changed the world. Fred's legacy continues, not through grand monuments or loud celebrations, but in simple, everyday acts of kindness. It lives in classrooms that teach emotional intelligence. It lives in parents who speak gently to their children. It lives in moments when someone listens, comforts, or offers patience. His message, that we are all worthy of love just as we are, remains powerful precisely because it comes from someone who knew how hard it can be to believe that. Fred Rogers may no longer be here to sing, to speak, or to sit in his familiar red cardigan, but the world he helped build, a world where kindness matters, where feelings are respected, and where every person has value, still grows. His story reminds us that even in a noisy, chaotic world, quiet voices still make a difference. And sometimes, it's those voices that stay with us the longest.